Breaking news, this is your World War III update. You know, one of the advantages of being in this preparedness industry is you get to see what all the rich people are buying. And I assure you, the rich people ain't buying the crap that a lot of schmucks get sold on. Unfortunately, there's a lot of bad apples in this space that are playing on people's insecurities, and they're selling them subpar quality stuff. That's neither here nor there. What I'm trying to say is I am very close to the spigot of the supply chain as it pertains to preparedness items, products, services, things of that nature. And I can tell you, being very well connected in this space, I have a connection who is very close to some very financially solvent and let's just say well-off individuals and institutions and governments. Sent me a message because I'm always prying. I'm always trying to get as much information out of these people as I can because, of course, it's a leading indicator for potential crisis. You want to see where is the big money putting their money at this point in time. And I'm not talking about BlackRock, who is currently in the process of doing one final shearing of the retail sheep. We'll talk about that in just a moment. I'm talking, of course, about the Bitcoin pump that is currently ongoing. You're wondering where all that Bitcoin money is coming from? It's coming from BlackRock. So that should be a cause for concern. Anyways, I'm getting off on tangents. A friend of mine sent me the following message after I was inquiring about the state of things. As for military contracts and intel on billionaire bunker stocking, I don't have info that I can actually share without getting myself into a lot of trouble. The same goes for big bunker stocking orders. I could literally blow your mind with some of this stuff for sure. But not only would that be the last order I ever got, but I'd probably have attorneys knocking on my door the next day waving copies of the NDAs that I always have to sign. And that is one of the problems with the industry, is that we know that these big purchases are being made. In terms of bunker building, it is off the charts right now. In terms of the stuff being put inside the bunkers, the high quality stuff, it is off the charts. You have to look for these leading indicators in the supply chain. And I can tell you right now, unequivocally, the rich are spending whatever money they have right now getting ready for shit to hit the fan. If you have all this currency and you're worried about the currency's volatility, you're worried about whether or not it is going to prove to be robust throughout the coming crises, you're going to move as much as that currency into hard assets while the getting is good, hence the price of gold moving up right now. But it's also in terms of raw commodities. Perhaps this is why the price of food continues to go up around the world in spite of numerous bumper crops around the world. Why is the price of food going up so much? Is somebody stockpiling something? The answer is yes. Nation states are stockpiling. North Korea, China, some of the biggest countries of the world are hoarding food, and it doesn't stop at nation states. It goes to institutions and militaries as well. Here are the headlines today, guys. Russian nuclear submarines are on full alert. They've already exceeded their density from the Cold War era. Right now, there are currently 11 estimated, because we don't know for sure, 11 Russian nuclear-armed submarines in and around the Atlantic right now. For all we know, they could be just hundreds of miles away from the eastern seaboard. There are 58 of these nuclear submarines in total, but military experts are saying that the density now has exceeded the Cold War era. Putin continues to ramp up nuclear rhetoric. In 3 of his most recent public appearances, one on the Tucker Carlson interview, one in an interview that he recently conducted with some hand-picked guy in Russia. Of course, we're on the eve of the Russian elections right now, so everything is about to go haywire in the next week or so. We also have him giving numerous speeches and conferences where he's more frequently and with more intensity and conviction expressed Russia's position on nuclear matters. Now, this might seem like it's normal, but it's not, because typically in the past, the media has amplified anytime he's used the word nuclear. However, this is actually, you're seeing an increase in frequency in terms of how much he's bringing it up, showing us that we're getting very, very close to NATO's involvement and NATO getting into a direct engagement with Russia, as we're going to talk about in just a moment. South Korea is hatching a plan to kill Kim Jong-un. I wonder how well this is going to sit with Kim Jong-un. You see, the South Korean defense minister apparently is hatching a plan so that when they go to war, they're immediately going to try to take out Kim Jong-un. So Kim Jong-un now is going to be exceptionally paranoid, because at any given time he has to presume that when he's above ground, because of course there's a whole other underworld underneath North Korea, underground cities, weapons manufacturing facilities, the whole 9 yards. When he's above ground, he has to presume that that missile could be inbound at any moment. And of course, North Korea is a heavily surveilled territory, much like the Gaza Strip, and you have U.S. nuclear submarines right there right now. I think, though, if they're talking about a war starting, he's going right into the bunker, and I don't think they have a bunker buster that is big enough to get at him. If Gaza has taught us anything, it's that you're very likely not going to win a subterranean war, especially against a nuclear superpower, and we know that China would immediately get involved. And China and the U.S. are about to part ways, and TikTok is most certainly going to be the trigger. More on that in just a moment. Germany is doing an overhaul of their Taurus missile systems for combat readiness. Why are they doing an inventory and a combat readiness check of their Taurus missiles? Probably because they're about to use them. Macron is going to be giving an urgent address this Thursday. Emmanuel Macron, of course, the president of France, is going to be giving an urgent address on Thursday. Now, Thursday is also midway through the Russian elections, okay? So something is about to go down in Europe. Mark my words. I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen very, very soon. NATO is basically planning to balkanize Ukraine. Russia knows it. The Russian Foreign Ministry knows it, and they had some things to say about it today that we're going to talk about in great detail. Russian oil plants are suspending activities. In fact, 3 oil refineries have been hit in just the past day, concurrent with that phony baloney invasion of the NAZI guys, who the Anti-Defamation League, up until, I guess this war started, was condemning as being a outright neo-NAZI hate group, are now being surprisingly quiet about the fact that they are trying to disrupt these Russian elections and doing the same thing they always do. And I don't understand how the Russians have not been able to get rid of these guys yet. Maybe they're just useful idiots, and the Russians are utilizing them for their false flag capabilities, because of course, when you get attacks like this, you got to imagine. I mean, I don't know what the equivalent would be in the United States but you're talking about the Russians, who every year they remember 20 million of their countrymen dying by the hands of the Germans in World War II, Operation Barbarossa, which intentionally set out to target and maim as many civilians as they possibly could. This was an incredibly gruesome and barbaric invasion that happened, and they all remember it. So when you put, when you say NAZIs are invading on the border, there's nothing that's going to galvanize your population more than that. So maybe Putin keeps these guys around. I mean, he could probably take them out with one hypersonic missile or one attack helicopter, but he keeps them around because they put the fear in the population and give him all the grounds that he needs to mobilize heavily for war. It's not surprising that this happens right on the eve of the election, and all the NAFO idiots are cheering this on, oblivious to the fact that what they're doing is the equivalent of what we did here in the Canadian Parliament when we all stood up, not me personally, but when all our politicians stood up and celebrated a guy who fought with the SS and probably partook in all manner of atrocities throughout numerous Holocaust camps and concentration camps throughout the war. And this is the equivalent of that, cheering on these guys, even if you are just hoping for the downfall of the Russian government. That's what the ideology that these guys are bringing represent, okay? And to Russians, that is completely reprehensible, and for that reason, this is going to give them more cause for volunteers. According to the Russians, they're getting like 30,000 volunteers a month before conscription and mobilization. Okay, so that is something to think about. I don't know if there's financial incentives going into that, but okay, so let's just keep on going here because we got a lot to talk about today. But those Russian oil plants that have now suspended activity, that caused a 12% reduction in oil refinement output, and some people are saying that this is why we're seeing this spike in oil prices today. Could also have something to do with the Houthis, who continue to badger, the honey badgers of the Middle East, continue to badger ships moving through that region, and apparently now they're testing out hypersonic missiles. So that's very concerning if you're an American or UK warship in that region. We have Ukraine targeting in their many drone strikes. Apparently they came very close to targeting a nuclear power plant in the most recent volley of strikes. Poland has dismissed 50 ambassadors to different countries. So 50 of their ambassadors are about to get fired. What could this shakedown be about? Is it about something to do with intelligence? Are they concerned that, because of course Poland is the next front in this conflict, so why are they trying to change out all these ambassadors who, you know, of course, are probably going to be in countries where Russia may have very close ties, and they're concerned about intelligence leaks? This is possibly why Vladimir Putin continues to be cool as a cucumber, in spite of the fact that drone strikes are becoming more frequent and his economy is starting to suffer as a result of it. He doesn't seem to be bothered at all that we're on the brink of nuclear Armageddon. Maybe he knows something that we aren't, that we don't. Poland is saying that they now have 300,000 NATO troops which can be combat ready at a moment's notice. Of course, steadfast defender, that is but the tip of the spear. This 100,000 strong force that is currently, NATO army, currently in Poland and regions all the way up to Finland, are basically there to create the infrastructure and to legitimate the infrastructure required to do a more mass mobilization that could be in the millions of troops. Okay, you need that tip of the spear. Ukraine is about to mobilize 500,000 men because apparently the guys at the front are very fatigued. We're going to talk about what it might look like if NATO enters this conflict and how they're going to likely try to balkanize the western parts of Ukraine and what NATO's role is going to be in order to relieve that stress that a lot of the Ukrainian troops are under. And of course, a lot of this is just speculation at this point, but it's based on the information, the open source intelligence that we can acquire. Poland is calling for nuclear weapons sharing. Poland is also committing to compulsory bunker building throughout the country. The TikTok ban is very likely going to trigger some sort of financial crash, quite possibly, or rapid decoupling. It's most certainly going to create a rift, and it's going to be a very politically divisive issue, in spite of the fact that no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, you should understand why it's a problem, okay? Why TikTok is a problem. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people I don't agree with on like 99% of things, and we still agree that TikTok is probably not a good idea for the simple reason that China has no equivalent. If we had some equivalent system app on every Chinese phone, then it would be fair game, okay? The fact is we don't, okay? We live in a glass house. They have the Great Chinese Firewall. So there's a big difference and a disparity in terms of the information and data that can be collected on the population. It's not because they can see what you're doing and hear what you're thinking and all this stuff. Maybe at some point in time, those panoptical aspects will become more important, but it's primarily about the drivers of culture and social upheaval and disruption, which is very likely what is going to happen this year. Cue the Civil War movie in just 1 month from now. Latvia has joined the Russophobic party. They're going to be expelling Russians who can't pass language tests. And they're calling for the reintroduction of the Iron Curtain. Can you believe that? Absolutely insane. There's a new propaganda film that seeks to now officiate that we are in fact in a new Cold War. It's a 8-part series, I believe, on Netflix. Incredibly high production, okay? Very high production with a lot of big names, Zelensky included, trying to really drive the point home. And on the heels of Oppenheimer, you see, Oppenheimer kind of set the stage. There was just enough anti-communistic, anti-Russian stuff to kind of open the door to more films like this and create more interest. And now this is going to be the time when we officially enter a new age of nuclear proliferation on the basis of the fact that we're now officially in a Cold War. Okay, so cue the, the bunkers in Sears catalogs. Is Sears even a thing anymore? They're going to start selling bunkers on Amazon. Mark my words, and it's going to be some Chinese company, ironically. So Ron from Atlas Survival, I hope that you are ready to compete. We're going to be doing a lot of stuff with Ron this year. We may even actually go down to see his factory soon in Texas, and we're going to be rendezvousing, hopefully, with some big podcast personalities there, put it that way. Gotta, keep networking while the networking is good. Zelensky is in fact inviting NATO troops into Ukraine. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, are clearing minefields in preparation for what looks to be a looming offensive into southern Lebanon. There's a complete media blackout in terms of all the attacks that have been happening. Lebanon has been opening up a can on Israel, targeting airports. I'm surprised they haven't went for strategic sites yet, but shit's about to hit the fan there. And the German government is building a trench, building a moat around the Bundeswehr, which is, or the Bundestag, I should say. I'm probably mispronouncing that. I quite frankly don't care, so keep your pedantic grammar policing to yourself. But the Bundestag is about to get a trench, a moat around it, to protect it from all the peasants when World War III begins. Not like it's going to stop a nuclear weapon, so I don't really understand the point of that. The Nazi invasion, oh, I said the word, now that video is going to be flagged, that's fine. It is what it is. I mean, we're on the way out anyways, so, let's just enjoy it while we can. It was stomped out almost immediately by the Russians, which is not surprising. Again, I'm not entirely convinced that this is not some sort of false flag group which is orchestrated in concert with the Russian government. Do they need this necessarily? No, but the fact that it was paired with the drone strikes maybe make me lean towards maybe this isn't, but there's always that possibility. Because what better way to galvanize the Russian population than to have some actual outspoken NAZIs explicitly calling for the destruction of Moscow, okay? If you want to put the fear into the hearts of every Russian person, and of course, fear is a great way to mobilize a people towards a common cause, that's what you have to do. You have to get some sort of group, and that's the best gift that you could have given Vladimir Putin on the eve of the Russian election, which is currently, people are voting right now as we speak. Okay, as I previously indicated, Ukraine is going to be mobilizing 500,000 people, many of which who are women. Now, I can't show you the videos because, the channel, I don't want to, we're already kind of on the chopping block. We're already in the crosshairs. But there is just countless amounts of videos of guys getting pulled off the streets, stuffed into vans. And I'm not sure if these are like Russian-speaking people. I'm presuming that they're probably targeting people who are potentially those who might trade sides if the time comes, and that might seem counterintuitive because why would you want people who are disloyal on your side? I think once you get in the ranks, from what I'm told, and this is, again, this is based on what we know, the fog of war is thick, but, for every 10 guys who are fighting on the front line, there's a couple guys in the rear to make sure that they don't turn around and try to either retreat or try to go and surrender to the opposing side. But the fact is that there's a lot of injustices that are happening there right now. And I think when the smoke clears, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to have a lot of explaining to do. Because right now, people are blood drunk. People are completely delusional when it comes to their processing of the events and the justifications that are being made. We're telling ourselves it's a democracy. Meanwhile, elections have been suspended. People are being, literally stuffed into vans against their will, okay, while their loved ones are crying for them not to be taken away. You have people being taped and publicly humiliated, taped to telephone poles, and I mean, all of this stuff is going to come out, okay? All of these channels right now who are completely disingenuously still continuously promoting this line and virtue signaling with this "we're the democracy" thing. I just hope that karma eventually serves justice to those channels, and I hope that people remember, okay, because we have been trying to straddle that line since the beginning of this thing, because I've always had the sense that something is wrong, as many of you have, and now that is becoming a very mainstream view, and it's about to at the turn of this election season, which is scary because that means that the powers that be may be more inclined to, let's just say, look the other way if they knew another Pearl Harbor type incident was about to happen. I'm talking about a flash bulb event, as I call it, an event that would give them the excuses that they need to rally the troops. Because you see, NATO, any alliance is only, an alliance is only as good, it's only as strong. The bonds of an alliance are only as strong as its common enemy. And if that common enemy starts to become less of an enemy in the minds of the people, while the alliance starts to fray, it starts to potentially falter and fracture and fall apart. And I think that's what you're seeing right now. So unless the Russian boogeyman does something very, very crazy to re-solidify those bonds, NATO is not going to unite in the way that they need to really drive the Russians out of Ukraine, which is, by most experts' accounts, the same ones who before were saying, oh yeah, Russia's failing this whole time. We've never said that throughout the course of this thing, and I hope people remember that we've tried to stay true to what's actually going on as opposed to selling you a bunch of BS that you might want to hear. What's going to happen and what you're seeing right now, and I'll tell you, with respect to the amount of ammunition that NATO has, I can tell you that NATO is lying about the amount of ammunition, the amount of shells they have. And herein lies the problem. People always presume that what NATO has on paper is what is going to be brought immediately to bear against the Russians. That is not true. NATO may collectively have 3 million troops. And I'm not saying it's that, I'm just saying, let's say theoretically NATO has 3 million troops across all the 33 countries, okay? They have more than that, but I'm just saying, or maybe they don't. I don't even know what it is. It's probably not that much, to be honest. Anyways, that's not the point. 3 million troops, at any given time, any of these countries is only going to commit a very small portion of their weapon stocks and their forces. Why? Because it's still just an alliance, okay? They still have to worry about their neighbors. Well, they have this common enemy, sure, but you're never going to give your best. In the same way that the United States is withholding a lot of its weapons, I'm presuming that the United States probably has only given up about 10% of its actual weapon stocks, and there's no international law that dictates that any NATO country has to disclose how much weapons they have. Yes, there were certain treaties on where you could put certain things, but there's nothing saying you have to disclose how many artillery shells you have, how much missiles you have, how many tanks you have. This is all stuff that is classified information. So to think that we're going to decimate our weapon supplies, maybe we'll decimate them, that means reduce by 10%. Above and beyond that, I can't see it happening. So what I'm trying to say is, NATO has the weapons to give to Ukraine. They just haven't given them because they're worried they're saving the best for their own ass. And this is the problem with alliances. And this is why NATO is so terrified, in spite of the fact that on paper they have overwhelming conventional military superiority. I mean, when you look at it in terms of the amount of fighter jets, I mean, they blow Russia out of the water. in terms of, just sheer manpower, they blow Russia out of the water. In terms of GDP, a lot of people say, yeah, but that GDP is fake, and it's, in various financial, the actual GDP that Russia has is resource-based, whereas we have this tertiary, secondary economy that isn't really a material thing. We don't have the industrial base to build the military that Russia has, but you're just taking them on their word at that point. So NATO has a lot more than what they're saying, which is what I'm saying. In terms of the Russian oil plant, they've suspended activities after, there's been 3 of them actually. This has reduced oil output by 12%. Ukraine launched strikes on refineries in the regions of Rostov, Ryazan, and Leningrad, and an oil refinery near the Russian city of Rostov-on-Don has temporarily suspended operations following a drone attack. My question is, how many more of these attacks can the Russian economy sustain? I don't think that many. It could be that the reason why Putin is so chill is that he just knows that, the end is nigh, and as it approaches, it's almost comforting and consoling, knowing that, this stressing about, this ultimate standoff between NATO is about to be soon decided. That could be part of the reason why he's just so... how can you say, just resigned to the fact that, this is the reality that we're going to have to face, and we just have to accept it. And he's going to have a cozy place at Mount Yamantu, deep in some bunker, and, with all his maidens, while the rest of his countrymen fight for food in the Moscow subway system. That could be part of the reason why he's so chill. But I think that, it's like, when we used to do, I used to be a mental health counselor, and when a person was approaching the end of life, or should I say, when a person was contemplating self-deletion, when they made a decision, they were very happy. They're very jubilant about just life all of a sudden. And that's how you knew that was a red flag warning sign that that person was about to take their life, is when they started to get really happy all of a sudden. When you go from depressed to happy, that signals you've made a decision, okay? And you're ready to commit. And this demeanor of Putin is kind of concerning in that respect, almost like he knows that, okay, this is it now. Now I've finally, there's no more anxiety about whether it will, or uncertainty. We have certainty, even though it's not the certainty that we want. I'm not saying that we're going to nuclear war right away, but it's a very slippery slope, as we're going to find out in just a moment here. Poland, as I indicated, they have 100,000 NATO troops currently in the country. They're basically changing out all the signs. They're imposing new restrictions in terms of what civilians can do in terms of taking pictures of military and troop deployments. Of course, you have steadfast defender exercises currently ramping up, and they're now saying that there's 300,000 who will arrive in the country not after the start of the war, but before it. This is according to the Polish Deputy Chief of Staff, Dymanowski, okay? So 300,000 NATO troops are on high alert for deployment to Poland. That is major. And what he is saying is that they're not going to get there after the start of the war. This is the direct quote. Not after the start of the war, but before it. So what does that mean? What does that really mean? We really have to think about that. Is he saying that, they're going to start the war, or that they're going to get word that the war is about to start? What does this all mean? That's I would encourage people to think about that. And if you can, let me know in the comments section below what your interpretation of that statement is. I'm just going to say the exact quote once again. If earlier there were 40,000 soldiers, now there are 300,000, and they will arrive in the country not after the start of the war, but before it, Dymanowski stressed. Very interesting. Now, from our Polish friends, our Polish OSINT source has sent me the following message. There are ongoing discussions about Poland officially joining the NATO nuclear sharing program, thus becoming the 6th NATO member country, apart from the US, UK, and France, and the first former Warsaw Pact member to station such weapons on its soil. Of course, there is Turkey, Denmark, is it Belgium? I can't remember exactly the countries that have U.S. nuclear weapons. Again, it's really not at this point in time about the nuclear weapons. It's about the deployment system. If you sign up for the F-35 program, you're basically committing to being a nuclear target by the Russians and the Chinese and the North Koreans and quite possibly the Iranians. Although the Americans right now are kind of walking that back because the Houthis are kicking their ass. And so they're trying to make amends with Iran on the low. Meanwhile, Israel is ramping up, okay? Because you have this certain thing happening right now where Netanyahu is concerned about his political future. And so his political interests are coming up against the broader geopolitical scheme that the neocons have hatched. Yes, they want to go to war with Iran. They're just not ready for it because the Houthis are creating all kinds of chaos, and maybe they're trying to postpone the chaos that is being caused by the disruption in the waterways. Anyways, right now, before I forget, of course, we have the Americans about to deploy and do this port at Gaza, which is great for the Gazan people in the short term because they need the food, they need the supplies. They say there's not going to be any boots on the ground. I'm very suspicious of that. Of course, there's a lot of NATO, or should I say, coalitional forces that are ready to go in Cyprus at a moment's notice when this war with Lebanon begins. And I do believe that eventually what's starting off as a humanitarian effort will be exploited for its military potential when the time comes. Because, of course, when that front opens up with Israel and Lebanon in the north, Israel just simply doesn't have the manpower to police what's going on in the Gaza Strip. And according to some sources, Hamas is still functioning at 90%, if you can believe that, okay? They still have 90% of their manpower intact, supposedly. The Ministry of Defense in Poland is preparing an amendment to regulations regarding planning construction as part of the civil defense upgrade, which will make it compulsory to design to build bunkers in all new residential buildings. This goes parallel to the regulations that are already being processed that will allow the execution of such bunkers in existing facilities. All across NATO, they are starting to build bunkers. From Germany to the Baltics, everybody is getting ready for bunkers. So if you're in the market for one of these, defunct Cold War era bunkers, I would encourage you to get it while you can, because it's very likely that these things are going to be upgraded. And I don't even know if maybe the government can claim some sort of eminent domain thing where they can just take them back from people who've bought them. I don't know. I doubt it. I think they'll probably just build new ones because, that's what the government does. And they got taxpayer dollars to play with. And let's face it, it's the end, so why not go out with a bang? The Polish Foreign Ministry is replacing 50 ambassadors to other countries, which is just insane. This comes just days after Belarus announced that it is going to be replacing 6 ambassadors to other countries. Is this some sort of counterintelligence operation? I don't know, but we're getting close to crunch time. Poland has been approved by the U.S. State Department to purchase 821 stealthy JSON cruise missiles. These are capable of hitting St. Petersburg, okay? So they got 96 Apache helicopters inbound. They're trying to make themselves one of the biggest conventional fighting forces. And what's likely going to happen with Macron is he's going to take the lead. They're going to provide the nuclear umbrella. And of course, the U.S. with their paltry tactical nuclear B-61 gravity bombs that are chalked up to be, 3 times the size of Hiroshima or whatever. I mean, the Sarmat missile is like 1,000 times potentially. We're talking like Tsar Bomba it was, and they're talking about potentially bringing back nuclear testing in Russia. And they've even, Karaganov the other day indicated that they should bring back Tsar Bomba 2. But we're talking about, even if all of the tactical nukes, even if the United States use all of those tactical nukes, it's not gonna solve the problem. Like, it's not gonna stop the Russian army, which is insane to think, because they're so well distributed. I mean, the underground, it's just not going to have an effect. You have to use city killers. You have to use the strategic weapons to really make a dent. So France is going to be the nuclear umbrella. Poland is going to provide the manpower, utilize the manpower of Eastern Europe and the conventional forces of Eastern Europe, which, of course, the Westerners who are too scared to fight a war, but really like to cheerlead one on from the comfort of their living rooms in their boxer shorts on the internet. Well, we're going to supply all the fake money, and they're going to supply the manpower, and that's what they've continued to sign up for. I can't believe there's not a rebellion yet in Ukraine, but one of these days there very well could be. Seizure of Russian assets, I don't even know if I want to talk about that today, but that could potentially be what triggers a economic collapse. There's a lot of things right now that could trigger economic collapse. The seizure of Russian assets is one of those things, okay? Because our globalized world, I should say, as soon as it becomes multipolar, there's going to be an economic shakedown as a result of that, because there's going to be a lot of divestment, cross-border divestment, which happens, and that's going to create major disruptions, and that's probably when you're going to see the crash. It could even happen with TikTok as a result of Chinese companies starting to kick out American companies, and you start to get into this next level trade war, which can definitely trigger some stuff, okay? Estonia is also considering troops to Ukraine. In terms of NATO troops in Ukraine, okay, this is probably what I should have talked about first, but I've rambled on for 36 minutes, but this is the most important order of the day, in spite of the fact that mainstream media would have you believe that this Russian situation is no longer an issue, even though we are at the pinnacle of potential nuclear warfare right now. NATO has a secret agenda for troops in Ukraine. This is according to Maria Zakharova, the Foreign Ministry spokesperson, okay? Now, they are saying that the U.S.-led bloc are plotting to divide up the country and balkanize it. So, you have all these bilateral agreements with all these individual countries, and the concern is that everybody is going to take a little piece of the pie at some point. Now, the problem is although Putin has communicated mixed messages, and I've been arguing with a friend about this, not arguing, but having a debate about this, you know, because he seems to be of the belief that Putin is actually welcoming NATO forces in to the western part of Ukraine and won't respond militarily if they do intervene. And I'm saying I don't see how that's at all feasible, because as soon as NATO troops enter in Ukraine, even if under the guise of humanitarian mission, peacekeeping, even if they are there militarily but not directly engaged in the front, this creates this creates a gray zone where you're not going to be able to discern Ukrainian soldier from NATO soldier. Essentially, what is going to happen is that, let's just say Poland decides to go into the western part of Ukraine because Ukraine is starting to collapse on the front line. Well, you have right around this time that this is happening, the F-16s are going to come into play. Who else has F-16s? Romania and Poland. So at the same time then, you have this confusion because on the one hand, you're going to have a no-fly zone imposed. So as soon as the logistical supply lines are either bombed out by the Russians, because of course the Ukrainians, in order to continue to fight the war at the front, they're going to be continuously sent weapons through Western Ukraine. So inevitably, you're going to have a situation in which Russia is forced to target, these supply lines, and you're going to have Polish troops or Romanian troops or NATO troops, whoever is there, French troops, they're going to get caught up in the crossfire. They're going to be targeted. Now, whether NATO makes a big deal about this or whether they keep it on the low because they don't want to risk nuclear escalation is another story. But the fact is, as soon as you allow NATO troops in any capacity, it's a very, very slippery slope. Now, I'm not going to get into his theory as to why Putin is okay with having troops into the country. Putin has said in numerous interviews and hinted at, yes, Poland, take control of Lviv or Lvov, depending on what persuasion you're of. And Hungary, you can have this. And okay, so there is a view, and I would have to say that this view has some merit, that if they were to continuously push back and go all the way to Kiev and Odessa, okay, then you're going to have a Western Ukraine, which, if it doesn't come under the auspices of some other country, then it's going to go rogue. And that could be a perpetual problem. But maybe Putin would rather have that part of the country under control than to just have them, doing their own thing and falling apart. Because it's almost better for there to be certainty, for it to be under a centralized power, than to have it just doing their own thing. All of these statements that Macron and other NATO politicians make about the possibility of introducing contingents or some kind of paramilitary units into Ukraine are related to the partition of what they see as the remnants of Ukraine. Territorial aspirations help explain why Kiev has not been invited to join NATO, the NATO bloc yet. This would require all NATO members to recognize Ukraine's borders, and not all of them are willing to do so, he claims, or she claims. So they're saying that they don't even know what Ukraine is. They can't even agree on what Ukraine is, because historically, maybe Poland lays claim secretly to parts of Ukraine. I don't know. As for Paris, Zakharova said French troops invaded Russia in the early 19th century and again in the 20th century. France would do well to remember how that ended. The moral preparation of the population in both NATO countries and Ukraine is underway, Zakharova said, with some politicians speaking about such an outcome openly. All this is happening, as usual, with NATO members under a false flag. Very interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what Macron says in his address to the people in the coming day ahead. In the next week, I think a lot of our questions are going to be answered with respect to what's going to happen in Europe, with respect to what approach Russia is going to take moving forward after this election is out of the way. And it's going to be a very, very interesting few days. Zelensky, however, has openly, has basically said that we won't mind. We welcome trainers and technical personnel from NATO countries, so they're open to the idea. Romania already apparently has boots on the ground in Moldova. Special forces are offering military assistance in training, so that could be very well where a war is about to start in and around the Transnistria front, as well as that other breakaway part, that breakaway territory inside Moldova, who is very pro-Russian. Russian troops on Finland's border, Russian troops and weapon systems will appear near the borders of Finland after it joins NATO, Putin said in an interview. Well, Finland is already in NATO and Russian troops are already at the border, so I think it's only a matter of time before something pops off in that region. Germany's only reason not to send the Taurus missiles, according to Olaf Scholz, is that German troops would have to be there. So it's important to note that they're not concerned about Ukraine's ability to use the Taurus deep inside Russian territory. They're primarily concerned about the placement of Russian troops in the country that would be required for them to be deployed there. So that's a very important distinction to make. In terms of these Russian nuclear submarines that are abound, Russia has significantly increased the deployment of its nuclear submarines in the Atlantic Ocean. Speculation suggests that up to 11 Russian nuclear subs are operating in the Atlantic as we speak. All of these, of course, have enough nukes to wipe out basically half of North America in just one. Analysts differ in interpreting Russia's actions, with some linking it to the conflict in Ukraine. You think? General Chris Cavoli of NATO observes an unusual increase in Russian military activities, attributing it to their involvement in Ukraine. I'm surprised they're actually admitting. They're basically saying that the DEFCON level is most certainly ramped up. The exact number of Russian nuclear submarines in the Atlantic is uncertain, but is speculated to exceed Cold War era densities. More nuclear subs than there were during the Cold War. And of course, they call it the Cold War, and they're trying to compare this to the Cold War, but there wasn't a hot war like we're seeing now on the scale of what we're seeing now during the Cold War. There was no war. So this is much worse than the Cold War. Something to keep in mind at all times when they make those parallels between the Cold War. Yeah, so not good. Not good at all. And last but not least, South Korea draws up plans to kill Kim Jong-un. South Korean defense chief orders up a plan to kill Kim and other top officials in Pyongyang in the event that a war breaks out on the peninsula again. If Kim Jong-un starts a war as a key unit of military massive punishment and retaliation, KMPR, you must become the world's strongest special operations unit to swiftly eliminate enemy leadership. Again, I'm not sure how they're going to do that. It's estimated that Pyongyang has sent 6,700 containers, actually 10,000 containers, since last September to Russia, with a total of 3 million rounds of ammunition. Now, if you're North Korea, if you're giving 3 million rounds of ammunition to Russia, that must mean that you have tens of millions of rounds, because there's no way you would be giving that up unless you knew that you were very well taken care of, especially when your own country was on the brink of conflict. Okay, you know, I've had this guy on the screen the whole time. Let's check out. People are like, hey, bring back the screen. We like the screen. Well, I listened. Back by popular demand, there's the screen. Anti-Kremlin forces urge everyone to begin evacuating the cities of Kursk and Belgorod. I mean, this is just hilarious. These are the NAZI guys, okay, that I've been talking about, who the NATO crowd and the Western media is cheering on. And it's so incredibly pathetic because it's the equivalent of giving a standing ovation to a former Nazi soldier in the Canadian Parliament. That's exactly what this is. Okay, the guy who leads one of these groups is an outspoken Nazi. Okay, so it is what it is. What do we got going on here? We got another, this is just more scenes of these oil refineries. Every day this is happening. Okay, so every day we got oil refineries going up in smoke with drone attacks. Nothing new there. NATO aircraft are practicing the use of tactical aircraft from highways. So it's interesting to see these fighter jets trying to take off from highways, okay? Because they're getting ready, because, you know, you want to distribute your planes in the case of nuclear war. And this is what they're doing. This is the training that they're doing. And this is very unorthodox training. This is that Netflix documentary, Turning Point, The Bomb and the Cold War. I watched episode 1 last night, and I gotta say, it's very well produced. And I have a feeling that it's going to deepen a lot of the hypnosis around the issue, unfortunately. These are the locations of all of Russia's oil refineries and their petroleum refining and chemical industries, all of which are in shooting distance of Ukraine. So it's starting to take its toll the more Ukraine targets these places. And eventually, I think it is going to force Russia to do something drastic. Now, this is the tunnel and trench system that they're installing at the Bundestag. Apparently, this has been something they've been thinking about since 2019. So I don't really understand this. I don't even understand this from a satellite point of view, how this is going to look necessarily, but I guess they're preparing for civil unrest or something like that, because that's certainly not going to stop a nuclear bomb. This is a graph that shows BlackRock versus MicroStrategy's Bitcoin holdings. If you're familiar with Michael Saylor, he is one of the key proponents of Bitcoin. And back in, 2020, when all the mania was happening, when all the retail investors were pouring into the markets, MicroStrategy started buying, and they never sold. And I got to give Saylor props for that, in spite of the crash of Bitcoin in, early 2022, mid 2021. He held on, and they kept buying, in fact. And then it kind of stagnated until 2023 when Bitcoin started to kind of rise up again. And then all of a sudden, just since the beginning of the year, BlackRock has now more Bitcoin than MicroStrategy. So what the hell is going on? Why is BlackRock buying so much Bitcoin? And are they trying to lead a massive bull run into the market only to do a rug pull at some point in time? It surprises me that the same people, like the reason why people, the same element that criticizes this massive mega corporation that is BlackRock that owns half the world, the same people who were criticizing BlackRock for the longest time are now cheering that as some sort of thing that validates Bitcoin as being a credible decentralized form of finance. But if you ask me, those are some red flags right there. Why is BlackRock trying to get in on this? Very concerning. Sweden is calling for the militarization of this island right here, which is right across from Kaliningrad. It's around 330 kilometers. And now that they're a member, of course, of NATO, they're going to start arming this. And that is just going to ramp up the escalation even more, because who knows what they're going to put there and how that is going to affect the strategic calculus of the region. What else do we got going on here? Global average temperatures are off the charts. Okay, off the charts. We're going to have an expert here on the weekend who talks about a lesser known aspect of this whole thing and why it's happening. You see, something happened in 2020, and a lot of the aerosols that were in the atmosphere as a result of carbon emissions, because there was this big change that was made to international shipping, and the fuel that ships use is not as dirty as it used to be, which is good for people's health. However, it had some unintended effects, and right now we are seeing massive spikes in temperature. We're talking about increases in temperature that are just off the charts, okay? I think we're already at over 2 degrees. You know how they talk about 1.5 degrees C? We've been at 2 degrees now for some time, and sea surface temperatures are off the charts. The oceans are heating up rapidly, and they don't know why, but in fact, they do. They're just not really spilling the beans on it yet, and we now have the answers, and we're going to hopefully disclose that this weekend with this guest. Denmark is wanting to conscript more people for military service, including women, for the first time. You know why they're conscripting women? Because the populations in the West are contracting, and it's old people. So everybody's too old to enter in the military service. And so what you have to do then is you have to tap the female aspect of your population. And you can do this actually this day and age because war is fought more remotely. You know, there's no reason why. I mean, maybe a woman would have a hard time, some women, not all, would have a hard time picking a guy up in the middle of a war zone and keeping their composure under gunfire and artillery fire, but they can fly a drone, okay? They can perform a lot of other duties that don't necessarily require them to be right on the front line. So as technology evolves, it becomes more amenable to women being on the front line. And I'm not talking in any sort of glorified, you know, we're all equal type sense. I'm talking, you know, there's no reason why a woman can't fly a drone as good as a guy, all right? But there might be a difference in physical capabilities, which cannot be understated. But this is what's happening in the West, is we're running out of people, okay? So what they're going to do is they're going to put a gun in women's hands, and they're also going to give immigrants a fast-track way of obtaining citizenship if they join the military. That's absolutely going to happen. In the Golan Heights, the Israelis are blowing up minefields. So are they getting prepared to go into southern Lebanon? Very, very likely. Very, very likely at this point. This is where the region of conflict is about to explode. Guys, I got to get going. I've been talking way too long. You got better things to do, and so do I. If you want to support the channel, please check out CanadianPreparedness.com for all your preparedness needs. It keeps a lot of local people employed, and we only sell the best, the highest quality of preparedness products, because I don't want you to be stuck out there in the cold, freezing with a broken saw or a busted up knife or food that just tastes like crap. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Canadian Prepper out.